There is a moment that many people describe in almost the same way, even though they would never think to compare notes about it. It comes sometime in the weeks or months after a grandchild is born. The love is there, enormous, immediate, sometimes overwhelming in a way that is difficult to put into words. It arrives with a force that feels almost prehistoric. And then, quietly, another feeling begins to settle in beside it. Not disappointment, not complaint, something harder to name than either of those. Perhaps it is the drive home after the first visit. The house that seems too quiet. The realizing that you are not part of the daily texture of a child's life in the way you had, without ever quite saying so, imagined you would be. You had a picture in your mind, or perhaps not a picture exactly, more of a feeling, of what this chapter would be like. Warm kitchens, children underfoot, afternoons without any particular agenda, the slow accumulation of being known. And the chapter is there. But it is somehow a different shape than the feeling suggested. It is important to say, clearly and at the beginning, that this is not about ingratitude. It is not about failing to appreciate what is there. The love is real. The joy is real. A grandchild's laugh is still one of the most complete sounds a human being can hear. None of what follows changes that. But there is something else happening in the lives of millions of grandparents, something that does not get discussed with the same frequency as retirement savings or healthcare costs or the question of where to live when you are older. It is the quiet transformation of a role that most people assumed they understood, a role they had watched their own parents and grandparents fill, only to discover that the world around that role had shifted in ways that nobody quite thought to warn them about. Grandparenting used to have a shape that most people could recognize. It was built around proximity. It was built around availability. It was built around the ordinary rhythms of a shared geography, neighborhoods, weekly dinners, the expectation that family lived within a reasonable distance of family. For much of the 20th century, and for most of human history before that, this was simply the default. Extended families were not a lifestyle choice. They were the practical reality of how life was organized. Children grew up, but they did not usually grow up and move to another state. The family was not nuclear in the way we use that word now, small, self-contained, portable. It was layered, sometimes messy, certainly not private, but held together by physical nearness. That world is still available to some people. There are grandparents who live 10 minutes from a grandchild, who babysit on Tuesdays, who are part of the school run and the Sunday dinners and the ordinary weekday emergencies that make a family feel real. And if you are one of those people, much of what follows is not your story. Or perhaps it is the story of someone you know. But for a very large number of people, and the number has been growing for decades, grandparenting takes place across a distance that the traditional image of the role never accounted for. Across hours of highway, across time zones, across the particular silence of a screen that shows you someone's face but cannot let you hold their hand. This is not a crisis. It is not a tragedy. But it is a change. And changes of this kind, changes that affect something as intimate as how a family holds together across generations, deserve to be understood clearly. Not explained away, not softened into sentiment, but looked at directly, with some patience, and with enough honesty to say what it actually costs. That is what we are going to do today. We are going to look at how the grandparent role changed, why it changed, and what it still means, in a world that has made it harder, stranger, and in certain ways more important than it has perhaps ever been. To understand where we are, it helps to understand where we started. And where families started, for most of human history, and through most of the 20th century, was together. Not together in the romantic sense. Not always in the harmonious sense. Extended families living in close quarters could be difficult, intrusive, occasionally unbearable. The grandmother who always had an opinion. The grandfather who expected to be obeyed. The complicated hierarchies and unspoken tensions that come when multiple generations share not just holidays but daily life. Nobody who has thought honestly about the past should confuse proximity with paradise. But the proximity was real, and it shaped everything about what it meant to be a grandparent. For most of human history, grandparents were not occasional visitors. They were part of the operational fabric of a family. They watched children while parents worked. They passed on knowledge, practical, cultural, spiritual, in the course of daily conversation, not through scheduled calls or special visits. They were present for the ordinary moments. The meals, the afternoons, the slow Tuesday evenings when nothing was happening and everything was accumulating. Their presence was not a gift for special occasions. It was simply a given. In the decades following the Second World War, something began to shift. The post-war economy in the United States and across much of the Western world opened up possibilities that previous generations had not had. Jobs were available in new places. Universities expanded. The promise of a better life meant a life that was often somewhere other than where you grew up. Young people moved. They moved for work, for education, for the particular kind of freedom that distance from home can offer. And in the beginning, this did not necessarily mean moving far. But it meant moving. The suburban expansion of the 1950s and 1960s was the first chapter of this shift. Families moved out of the cities and into neighborhoods where they knew almost no one, where the extended family had to be rebuilt from scratch, and where the grandparents were often left behind in the old neighborhoods, the old cities, the old ways of life. The nuclear family, parents and children, self-contained, mobile, became the cultural ideal. Independence was progress. By the 1970s and 1980s, economic pressure and professional opportunity had pushed this even further. Corporate careers required relocation. The best jobs were not always where the family was. And the family itself was smaller, fewer siblings, fewer cousins, fewer of the overlapping networks that had once tied people to a place. The world became larger, and families became lighter, easier to move, better at traveling but harder to root. The housing changes of the last 40 years added another layer. Rising property values in the cities where good jobs concentrated pushed younger generations either out entirely or into a kind of financial precariousness that made staying close to parents genuinely difficult. A young family trying to afford a home in the city where they work may not have the option of living near the grandparents, even if they want to. Geography has become, in many cases, a financial question as much as a personal one. Technology arrived in this story as something that looked like a solution but functioned more like an accommodation. Video calls made distance easier to manage. They did not make distance smaller. You can see a grandchild's face on a screen. You cannot smell their hair. You cannot sit beside them on a sofa and say nothing in particular. You cannot be there when they wake up frightened, or when they do something funny at the dinner table, or when they simply need someone to be in the room. The shift from multi-generational households to dispersed nuclear families happened gradually, over decades, driven by forces that felt like progress at every individual step. Better jobs, better education, better opportunities. Nobody sat down and decided to move grandparents to the margins of family life. It happened as a side effect of 100 sensible decisions, each of which made perfect sense on its own. The result is a world in which grandparenting, for many people, is a role they inhabit at a distance. Where the relationship is real and loving and important, but where it has to be built, sustained, and continuously negotiated in ways that the previous model of grandparenting never required. Where every visit has to be planned. Where every phone call has to be scheduled. Where the ordinary, unremarkable texture of daily presence has been replaced by a set of encounters that are, almost by definition, events. Events are wonderful, but they are not the same thing as a life shared. Consider what a visit actually looks like. You have planned it for weeks. You have arranged the travel, adjusted your schedule, perhaps driven a long distance or flown somewhere. You arrive. The grandchildren are pleased to see you, or at least one of them is. Children are not always cooperative narrators of their own emotions. The first hours are warm. Then someone is tired. Then there are the ordinary obligations of a family's weekend. The soccer game, the birthday party for a classmate, the homework that didn't get done. The very full schedule that modern families tend to carry. By Sunday afternoon, You are aware that you are going home tomorrow. And the visit, which felt long in the anticipation, feels very short in the living. This is not a complaint. Parents are busy. Children's lives are full. Nobody is doing anything wrong. But there is something real in that Sunday afternoon feeling. The awareness that you have had a collection of moments rather than a stretch of time. That you have been a visitor rather than a presence. And that for all the warmth that is genuinely there, the relationship is being built from a different set of materials than the one you grew up watching. Many grandparents describe a particular discipline they have learned. A kind of internal self-editing that happens automatically now, without even deciding to do it. They do not comment on the parenting choices they might have made differently. They do not say what they think about screen time, or diet, or bedtimes, or the particular way a child is being handled in a difficult moment. They watch, they love, they adapt, they hold their tongue in ways that require real effort and real practice. This is not resentment, or at least, not simply resentment. It is the recognition that the role of grandparent in this era requires a kind of humility that the role did not always require before. The old model of grandparenting came with authority, with weight, with the assumption that experience conferred a kind of standing. The new model is more careful. It recognizes that parents have their own ways, their own values, their own considered decisions about how to raise a child, and that the grandparent who insists too loudly on the old methods will find themselves even more at the margins. So they learn the discipline. And mostly, it serves them. But it is a discipline. And disciplines cost something. There is also the particular experience of watching a grandchild grow up in pieces. You see them at Christmas. You see them in the summer for a week. You see them on a screen on Sunday evenings. And each time, they are different. They have changed in ways you did not witness. There is a new joke they tell that has a context you don't know. There is a friend whose name you have heard but whose face you have only seen in photographs. There is an entire inner life accumulating, and you are present for the surface of it rather than the depth. This is not anyone's fault. It is simply the arithmetic of distance applied to love. And yet, and this deserves to be said with equal weight, the joy is still there. It is still one of the remarkable experiences a human being can have, to be genuinely and unconditionally loved by a child who does not yet know how to perform love or manage it or make it complicated. A grandchild's affection is one of the simplest things left in a world that has made almost everything complicated. The hug that happens at the moment of arrival. The drawing made specifically and exclusively for you. The question asked with complete trust. The way children ask questions before they have learned to worry about how the question sounds. That remains. The distance does not take that away. But it makes it rarer. And rarer things, even precious ones, carry a different weight than the daily ordinary. Many grandparents do not say these things out loud, not because they are not felt, but because there is no obvious place to say them. The cultural script for grandparenting is almost entirely positive. You are supposed to be grateful. You are supposed to celebrate the grandchildren you have. You are supposed to understand that your children are busy and their lives are full and that this is simply how it is now. All of that is true. And it leaves very little room for the quieter, more complicated truth that being a grandparent now often involves a kind of longing that sits alongside the love, not replacing it, but present alongside it, all the time. There is something grandparents carry that no one else carries, and it is not something that shows up in the usual descriptions of what grandparents are for. It is not the babysitting. It is not the gifts. It is not even the love, though the love is real and specific in ways that deserve their own examination. It is something older and harder to name. It is the living quality of memory. The fact that a grandparent represents not just an individual person but a point of connection to a time that a grandchild has not experienced and can only approach through the people who were there. When a grandparent tells a story, not a formal, organized story, but the kind that comes up naturally in conversation, in the middle of doing something else, the way stories actually travel between people, they are doing something that cannot be replicated by any other means. They are making the past physically present. The decade that the grandchild knows only as history becomes something that existed in a real body, in a real life, in choices and fears and small joys that a grandchild can almost touch. This is not sentimental. It is deeply practical. Children who know their family history, who have heard the stories, absorbed the texture of another era through the people who lived it, tend to have a stronger sense of who they are. Psychologists who study intergenerational storytelling have found that children who know more about their family's past, both the difficult parts and the ordinary parts, show greater resilience in the face of difficulty. The knowledge that they come from people who survived things, made choices, failed at things and continued anyway, that knowledge is not trivial. It is a kind of foundation, and grandparents are often the only people left who can provide it. Parents are too close to the present. Their stories are usually about the child's own life, or about the recent past that the child already partly remembers. They are necessarily forward-looking. They are managing a life in motion, trying to prepare a child for a future that is arriving very fast. They do not have the time, and perhaps not the perspective, to be archivists of the family's longer story. Grandparents have that time, and they have the perspective that only comes from having lived long enough to see a pattern repeat itself. They have seen economies collapse and recover. They have seen fashions and certainties come and go. They have lived through enough decades to know the difference between what is genuinely new and what is simply wearing different clothes. This is not nostalgia. It is a particular kind of clarity that is only available from a certain distance. The grandparent who tells a child about what money felt like in a difficult decade, or what it was like to work a job that no longer exists, or what their neighborhood looked like before it changed, that grandparent is doing something irreplaceable. They are giving the child a sense of time as something lived, not something abstract. They are demonstrating, simply by existing and remembering, that things were different and became different again and will become different once more. That the present, however overwhelming it feels, is not the only possible arrangement of the world. There is also the specific quality of grandparental love that is worth naming carefully. It is different from parental love, and the difference matters. Parental love is profound, but it is not without stakes. A parent's love is connected to a parent's hope, a parent's fear, a parent's investment in what a child becomes. A parent wants certain things for a child: academic achievement, social confidence, a good life, and this wanting, however loving its origin, can make parental love feel like it comes with conditions attached, even when it doesn't mean to. The parent who says "I love you" unconditionally can still be the person who is quietly disappointed by a choice. Not because they are bad parents. Because they are invested. Grandparental love is usually less entangled. The grandparent has already made their peace with the things they cannot control about how life unfolds. They have watched their own children grow into people who are not exactly who they imagined, and they have mostly come to see the difference as interesting rather than threatening. They carry a perspective that has been earned by exactly this experience. The experience of loving people across decades and learning that love survives the gap between expectation and reality. This makes grandparental love a particular kind of gift. It is love that has already made its adjustments. Love that has settled. Love that does not need the grandchild to be anything other than what they already are. For a child navigating a world that often feels full of expectations and performance and the quiet pressure to become something specific, a grandparent's uncomplicated pleasure in their simple existence is not trivial. It is oxygen, and yet this is precisely what distance puts at risk. Not the love itself, which survives distance, but the delivery of it, the regular, unremarkable, ordinary delivery of a love that has no agenda, through the everyday encounters that make love something a child can feel in their bones rather than simply know in their head. When a grandparent is present only for events and occasions, the love is still there, but its texture changes. It becomes something a child receives in concentrated doses rather than absorbs gradually. And there is a difference between those two things, even if the love itself is the same. Modern culture does not think about this much. We have a tendency to measure the contributions of older people in practical terms: childcare hours provided, financial transfers made, tasks completed. What grandparents carry that cannot be measured tends to get left out of the accounting. The stories told, the patience modeled, the sense of time and continuity simply communicated by being old enough to remember. These things do not show up in surveys about economic contribution. They are not visible in the statistics about how many grandparents provide childcare each year. But they are real, and they are not being adequately replaced by anything that distance and screens and annual visits can provide. None of this is meant to suggest that modern grandparenting is a failure. It is meant to suggest that it is a harder thing than people expected, and that the difficulty deserves to be acknowledged rather than smoothed over. Most grandparents manage, in one way or another, to find their shape in a role that no longer comes pre-formed. They learn to be present across distance in ways that require creativity and patience. They learn to make the shorter visits count, to be really there, really attentive, in the hours they have, rather than half present in the hours they might have had. They learn to tell their stories through letters, through phone calls, through the particular technology that modern life has provided. They learn to love a grandchild they know from a distance in ways that are different from, but not lesser than, the love that comes from daily presence. This is not a small thing. It is, in fact, a remarkable thing. That love is capable of adapting to conditions that nobody designed it for. That a relationship as specific and embodied as the one between a grandparent and a grandchild can find ways to survive and even flourish across hundreds of miles and the strange mediation of screens. But it requires something. It requires grandparents to hold their own role with more deliberateness than previous generations had to. It requires the decision, made consciously, not just assumed, to be someone specific in the life of a grandchild. Not just a presence at Christmas and birthdays. Not just a name a child is taught to recognize. But a person, someone with stories and opinions and a particular way of seeing the world, someone whose voice a grandchild learns to recognize and trust over time. This is not easy when you are working against distance and busy schedules and the simple fact that a child's world is full of people and demands and distractions. But it is possible, and the grandparents who manage it, who stay consistent, who keep calling, who find the small ongoing gestures that signal continued presence. Those grandparents tend to have relationships with their grandchildren that are genuine and lasting in ways that visits alone cannot create. There is something worth holding onto in all of this. The traditional picture of grandparenting, present, daily, woven into the ordinary fabric of a family's life, is no longer the picture that most grandparents are living. But the traditional meaning of grandparenting is still available. The transmission of memory, the modeling of patience, the love that has no agenda, the presence of someone who has lived enough to know that most of what seems urgent will pass, and most of what seems small will be remembered. These things do not require living 10 minutes away. They require consistency. They require the decision to keep showing up, in whatever form showing up takes in a particular life, across whatever distances have opened between a family's generations. What this era of grandparenting is asking is not less than what previous generations gave. In certain ways, it is asking for more. It is asking for love that can hold its shape without the support of proximity, without the reinforcement of daily routine, without the ease of simply being there. It is asking for the deliberate choice to remain present in a life that has moved beyond easy reach. That is not a small ask. But grandparents have always given more than anyone calculated. They have always been the ones who held the longer view, who loved without keeping score, who showed up even when showing up was difficult. That has not changed. The address has changed. The distance has changed. The technology through which presence is sometimes delivered has changed. But the people doing this work, quietly, without much acknowledgement, across the distances that modern life has opened, are doing something that matters more than it usually gets credit for. They are keeping something alive. They are keeping the thread of a family's story from going slack. They are being the people who remember, who love without conditions, who are still there, even when being there takes more effort than it once did, and even when the shape of being there looks nothing like the picture they once carried in their minds. That is not a diminished version of grandparenting. That is what grandparenting has become. And the people living it, with all its difficulty and all its love, are doing something worthy of the name.